This morning, I'm meeting with Dr. Christina Perkins, who is our relatively new assistant director at the UT Psychological Clinic. And I've been wanting to do this for a while to introduce you to not only folks within the institution, but also people in the community.
Yeah.
So let me introduce myself. I'm Leticia Flores. I am the director of the UT Psychological Clinic. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm really happy to have Dr. Perkins here with us. So why don't we start by sharing a little bit about yourself?
I am Dr. Christina Perkins, and I grew up here in Tennessee. I grew up in Mountain City, Tennessee, which is a tiny, tiny town on the border where North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee meet. So about 2.5, 3 hours from Knoxville. So spent the first 18 years of my life there, and then did my undergrad at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I majored in psychology there, and had big intentions of going into clinical psychology. Applied right out of undergrad and didn't get in, and so I took some time to work, and I ended up in a role in Johnson City, Tennessee, where I worked for Safe Haven Sexual Assault Center, which I think now has gotten merged in with our own Helen Ross McNabb Center as the Sexual Assault Center of East Tennessee. But at that time, it was an organization called Safe Haven, and so I worked for them as a sexual assault victims advocate, and realized that kind of work, that level of community interaction was my heart, and so I think that was my first job as a social worker with my bachelor's degree, and so I did that work for 2.5 years, which is a long time in the sexual assault advocacy work, I think. And then I moved, I feel like I've lived all over. I moved to San Francisco for a year, where I worked for the Department of Public Health on HIV PrEP trials when they were in their second stage of trials. So I worked on one of those studies, and then I moved to Knoxville, back to Tennessee, to do my master's in social work here at UT. Because in-state tuition is real, and I wanted to be closer to my family. I have a little sister who's 12 years younger than I am, and so I wanted to be closer to her. And so moved back here, where I've been since time is not real, 2011. I moved to start the program. And finished in 2013, because the MSSW the full-time program's 2 years. So I did that. And then I've been in Knoxville in clinical practice ever since. I started my career. I had a brief stint with Solution Source, which is no longer an agency. I don't know if you know.
I do not have any.
I think they became Omni Community Health. So I did a brief stint there, and it was not a good fit for me. So I ended up at Helen Ross McNabb, where I did 5.5 years in substance abuse outpatient services. So I did 3 years in intensive outpatient, in the women's intensive outpatient program, where I led the group. And then we got some federal funding for me to create, not me to create, we got some federal funding to create a program for pregnant and parenting women who had substance use disorders. And I was able to help start up a program there called the MOMS program. I got to do that for a few years, and then ultimately wanted to be in my own practice. And so for the last 5 years, I've been in the community in my own private practice here in Bearden, where I specialize in working with folks who have had developmental and complex traumas, and folks who are LGBT primarily are my client base.
All right. And I think I first met you when you were considering whether to pursue a PhD or a DSW.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so I was struggling with whether I wanted a PhD, a traditional PhD, or a DSW, which is a Doctor of Social Work. The Doctor of Social Work is a clinical degree. So the class contents are all around enhancing clinical skill, and in particular UT's program is around organizational management and leadership. And so there is a piece of the program that is about kind of what it's like to be in nonprofit work, or what it's like to be in practice work, in terms of the kind of nuts and bolts of leading an organization versus being a clinician in an organization. For me, it was about being the best clinician I can be, and really honing those skills in a new way. And so I completed that program in 2021. So it's a 3-year program.
All right. So tell us about your current position at the UT Psychological Clinic.
about 3 years ago, you all invited social work students to intern here for their second year in the master's program. And so I think the second year that happened, I became the field instructor for those students. So making sure that they had somebody to sign off on their notes, watch all their session tapes. And then that kind of transformed into this position where I do that more full time than I was, and have a presence here in the clinic and attend staffings and also supervise some of the psych students, which I'm getting the opportunity to do this summer, which is a lot of fun. And so I think this role is really about helping merge some of the facets of care that social work provides, including creating possibly a case management program for the community. Making sure that the social work interns have somebody kind of on site who kind of knows what they're supposed to be focusing on, where they are in their learning objectives, and kind of helping keep them grounded in their placement.
What makes this placement unique for social work students, and your role in doing this unique?
So I think one of the things that makes it really unique is the capacity for recording the sessions and having them watched by another social work professional. So that's not something in my knowledge base that happens in any other practicum placement for social work. So generally in the second year, students are at organizations like Youth Villages, Helen Ross McNabb, Cherokee, Ridgeview, all the big community mental health players here in town. And for clinical students in particular, that can look like having a caseload of anywhere between 8 and 15 to 20 clients in a week, and that starts pretty quickly once they ramp up. So in my experience of having a field placement at Helen Ross McNabb, within the first couple of weeks, I was leading a therapeutic group. And so things happen quickly. There's this kind of like, okay, you're in the second year, it's kind of a trial by fire. Let's get you going, get you grounded in some skills. And I don't think that's universally true of all the placements, because there are many I'm not familiar with at this point, but that's common. Yeah, it's a common experience that you hear from social work students, that by the end of the placement, they feel really ready to manage the caseload expectations of community mental health practice. And so what I think the psych clinic does differently is that we slow that process way down, and then the students only have 1 to 3 or 4 clients by the end of their entire practicum experience. But where they are getting skill building is the depth of knowledge and the depth of therapeutic intervention that I think the interns that I've worked with would say they feel more comfortable inside the therapeutic room if they're going into clinical practice versus there might be a little bit of a difference in terms of them managing a higher therapeutic caseload. So I think the skill set that they're walking away with is just a little bit different. Not better or worse, just different. Yeah.
And I think if we think of if the average person in the community thinks about social work, I think often they may not assume that social workers do therapy or have their own private practice like you have.
Right.
And this setting allows for them to get trained to be able to do something like that.
And I think that's a misnomer about social work. There are lots of myths that we have to continue to bust in the community. So I don't often hear my colleagues say, "Oh, I'm a social worker." A lot of times, by the time we end up in private practice, they'll say, "Oh, I'm a therapist in private practice." And so I try really diligently to say I'm a social worker in private practice. I don't always do that. My fidelity to that's not 100%, but I try, because I think that reclamation of the word social worker is really important, because right now, and historically, it's been synonymous with case management. It's been synonymous with DCS work or child service work in that way. And that's a piece of what social workers can do, but it's not the entirety of our professional capacity. And so it feels really important, I think, to take that language back and to reuse that word differently.
And we're in fact going to be talking about that a little bit more in our orientation for the clinic, because similarly, psychological professionals, until they're in the settings with social work professionals, aren't very well educated either. I think there are a lot of myths and misconceptions that psychologists have about social workers, that social workers might have about psychologists, and that's the real beauty of the collaboration here, is that they get to learn what each other's professions do, what they don't do. They get to see where they overlap as well as where they differ. So it's It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's really, you know, and one of social work's ethical standards is is our commitment to collaboration and responsibility to our colleagues, and that includes interdisciplinary teamwork. And so I think that's one arena where medical social work actually does a really beautiful job. So social workers embedded in hospital systems, now in Summit Medical's primary care offices, they're getting to do a little bit of what we're doing as well. But I think that's people don't always think about that facet of social work where we are collaborating with so many different other professionals in the community. So I think that being able to bring social work into this setting is a really beautiful thing. I think it gives the students just access to so many different perspectives about about what helping can look like.
Yeah. Can you talk some about what therapy modalities you use, what interventions you use?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I came out of the master's program, I would have told you I'm a CBT therapist, but I think over the course of time that shifted. So I got training in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and that's a primary modality in my private practice. And I'm also about to get trained in internal family systems, which is another modality in the world. But I think my theoretical vantage point has stayed pretty solid in terms of honoring the person and environment perspective, but also pulling from systems theory and feminist theory and liberation psychology. And in 2020, I did a training with Shauna Murray Brown out of Baltimore, and she developed an entire, her doctoral dissertation, she's a social worker, her doctoral dissertation work was about developing this liberation-focused modality for decolonizing therapy. And so I was able to take that. It was a 9-month-long training that I took virtually in 2020 on decolonizing therapy for Black folks and helping to make sure that as a white practitioner, I'm staying grounded in where my lane is, but also not only pulling from white-centric therapy modalities, which our history is pretty rife with a focus on white folk focused lenses.
You said that you started out coming out of your master's saying you were a CBT therapist. Do you maintain that still, or?
I don't think so. I think I use facets of CBT in my work, and I really think I have a toolbox that I pull from. So I don't know that I'm holding fidelity 100% to any particular modality. I wouldn't say I'm a purist in that way, but I think I pull from CBT certainly.
So it's integrated within.
It's integrated, yeah. But I think because in that time in 2013, by the time I finished, the social work program taught motivational interview in terms of intervention techniques. I taught motivational interviewing and CBT. Those are the two I learned, and so I hung my hat as I was like, yeah, I do CBT therapy. I think that shifted over the course of time.
So how do you conceptualize that now that you're supervising students, right? Who were where you were, and it sounds like you've traveled from that place. So do you still think about grounding students in those basics? Do you look at integrating things earlier with them? Because I think about that a lot as well. Having experience, but then thinking about where students start in their training and how to help them along.
I think our knowledge, because my clinical focus is trauma, I think our knowledge about trauma, the impacts on the person and the body has evolved so much in the last 10 years that I try really diligently to bring those pieces and weave them in terms of like somatosensory therapy and just bringing the body into the therapy process in a way that nobody ever mentioned to me in my training, because we just didn't know. Like the last 10 years has been the advent of the ACEs study. All that information has come to light, and there's just a whole other kind of therapeutic trend in terms of making sure that we're bringing people's bodies in as well as their minds. And so I think that it seems the least overwhelming thing to ground students in kind of the rooted historical knowledge of the human in terms of CBT and kind of getting to the thoughts, feelings, behaviors triangle. Like I still very much want students to be grounded in that, and also then bringing the body in. So that's sort of how I talk about clients with our students. It's like, okay, what's happening with that person's body right now? Like, let's look at their body language. So very much helping them to try and stay attuned to what's happening, what's being said, but also what's not being said, which I think is age-old therapy. technique.
Yeah.
But
Just bringing in new knowledge
Yeah.
that you have. And you had mentioned earlier ACEs, and that's adverse.
Yes, sorry,
right.
adverse childhood experiences. So those studies came out of the Kaiser Permanente data. I don't remember what year that was now, but it's
definitely come into
yeah,
the field.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that, no one thing is a perfect system of measuring people's lived experiences, but I think that's really impacted trauma theory and trauma literature in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I agree. How do you see social work and psychology dovetailing, and how can we complement each other's work?
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things about the partnership of psychology and social work is that our goal is the same. Our goal is to help humans to exist in a way that they can thrive and not just be in survival mode. So I think that's a really beautiful thing that all of us are trying to do, but with just different language and different tools in our toolbox. And so I think that what we can do is help each other understand things from different perspectives. So one of the most powerful things for me about this partnership has been sitting and staffing and listening to the students bring their own clinical presentations and talk about client issues from their own perspective. And so having clinical psychology students bring, some of those students are pretty focused in CBT or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And then the counseling psychology students are pretty rooted in, I think, liberation psychology and having them
feminist, multicultural.
And having them bring that lens, and then having the social work students present on similar cases, but from the person and environment or kind of Bronfenbrenner's socio-ecological model, like having all of those different lenses in the same room, it really seemed like there were light bulbs all over the place for the students when they would ask questions, and the information or the answer is similar, but it's framed in such a different way, depending on how you think about the person and the problem they're bringing in to have help with. And so I really think being able to just introduce new ways of thinking about problems brings such creativity to the therapy room and to those relationships.
Yeah, it really enriches, I think, the conceptualization and the treatment planning, too.
Yeah,
I think we think of different options once we talk about it. And just for folks who might be listening to this, staffing is a yearly weekly meeting that we have with second-year clinical students who are just starting out in the clinic, as well as advanced counseling students who are coming here either in their third, fourth, or fifth year, and then the social work students who are coming in. And so having not only different disciplines, but also different levels or different levels of training. Some are beginners, some are advanced. And then having yourself, myself, and then the associate director, and then the clinic coordinator who's an advanced graduate student. There's just a lot of ideas, a lot of experience, a lot of creativity. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And that difference in lens is not something that I saw in my experience of being in community mental health. Like I often was surrounded by social workers. And so I think it's a really cool piece that the students get to think about things, and it doesn't sort of cement them and they're like, yeah, we're right. We're thinking about this the right way. It sort of actually opens that door to, you're thinking about this differently from me, but that's not wrong or bad.
Yeah.
And also here's this perspective. I think it creates a lot of room for yes and rather than but.
Yeah, in the application piece, I imagine these students going out into their external practicum and having a question and saying, I should ask the social worker about this, right? Instead of just sticking with other psychologists or their supervisors saying, oh, this person can give me a new lens, a new filter with which to look at this. That's what I'm hoping that they take from this.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that social work students too don't feel afraid to approach clinical psychologists in their arena, because I think one of the things professionally that happens is that we get so siloed into our own kind of networking and just job experiences. So like most of my colleagues at Helen Ross were social workers. Most of the colleagues that I know in private practice that I know are social workers. And so we see all the same people. We might sometimes see each other at trainings in the community, but I think this is a really beautiful way. I hope to plant those seeds that folks take with them, that they don't, that they can get different perspectives, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just that the vantage point is slightly different on the problem.
And they can offer different perspectives too.
Absolutely.
Right? They've got something useful that they can contribute.
Yeah, absolutely.
what are you excited about as you help train tomorrow's both social workers and psychologists?
I think I'm just excited about reaching a place in my own career where it feels like I can participate in that piece, participate in the training, and also learn from the students. Like there's the knowledge base that students are getting in the classroom now is just different than what it was when I was trained. And I'm really excited about this piece where I'm hoping that we forge some new relationships where our professionals aren't afraid to talk to each other, and they know that the other has something really valuable to share, and that they, as you said, they have something valuable to bring to the table too. Because I think that my experience of students is that social work students often feel like because the psych students are going to be in school so much longer, that they know significantly less, and that they're not quite in the same place. And the training's just different, and it's not better, worse, whatever. It's just different at its fundamental level. And so I think that it's really I hope it's really empowering social workers to go, no, I have a voice, I can use it, and it's important. That's what I hope. That's what I'm excited about.
So if you can talk a little bit, Dr. Perkins, about what the actual student experience is like here at the clinic. If we have a social work student coming here to work with you, what can they expect?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that they can expect things to have a kind of slow start. So I like to warn the students because other students are going to hit the ground running, like I said earlier, with really quick caseload buildup. And so they can expect to have orientation a week or two before the semester starts. So they're going to spend a few days with us getting kind of oriented to what the systems are in place here, what the technology is, what the kind of flow of things is in and out of the clinic. And then by about September, October, they're going to pick up 1 to 2 therapy cases. In addition, the social work students are going to be doing weekly screener shifts, which is a 2-hour block of time where they're going to call people who have called in to the clinic for interest in services. They're going to call them and do a screener assessment with them over the phone. And I think that takes anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the person and how much they want to speak about their experience. And then they're going to have weekly supervision with me. I tend to do reflective supervision, so I tend to want to know, in addition to what's going on with the client, what's going on with the student as they're sitting with the client, as we're watching this tape of them interacting, what's happening inside for them, what of their stuff might need to be looked at or thought about in their own therapy or personal work, because clients are going to bring up our own stuff, and so we have to be committed to working on that. And so I'm not therapying them by any means, but I am encouraging them to think about, could you have considered this? Did you consider thinking about it this way? And so we're going to look at some of the tape together. We're going to talk about what their sessions is like.
That scares every student, and then at the end they're like, I'm so glad you did it.
And so one of the things that I'm working on bringing to that experience is positive affirmation and feedback. I can tend to go for the like, what about this? What about this? What about this? Just in terms of ideas come into my brain. So I'm working on reminding students of what they're doing well as well. The challenge for me.
Because we assume they're doing well, right?
Yes,
it's
right.
Like, if we say otherwise, that's when you know.
Right.
I've had that same challenge. It's like, of course you're doing well.
Right.
But sometimes those words have to come out.
Yes, we have to hear them.
Yes.
That is not what my training as a social worker was like. I think one of my field instructors said, I don't give out gold stars. And I was like, oh, all right. So I think I operate from that vantage point. So I'm trying to work on that. But I think they can expect pretty consistent communication with me throughout the weeks. They're sending their tapes over. They're attending supervision, they're attending our staffing, but the ideal student, I think from my perspective, is pretty self-motivated to pick up cases, to know themselves well enough to know, like, what can I handle, what can I not, to be interested in doing their own independent learning, because when they come into the clinic in the fall, they haven't quite gotten grounded in modalities yet. And so we have to do a little bit of training in that way. So for our folks last year, they wanted some grounding in trauma-focused CBT. So we did a little, my colleague, Dr. Conklin, and I did a 6-week intro to TFCBT with our interns. We did like a 1 hour a week where they were expected to do some reading, reviewing some modules, and then we talked through clinically, what does this look like? And so it really varies by the set of interns that join us and what their skill set is, but they're at the beginning, especially, there's quite a bit of didactic interaction with me. And so I think by the time they leave, they feel a little bit more grounded in like, what does it look like to take a case from that screener into the the introductory first assessment session, and then all the way through to termination. And so we try and focus on each of those aspects of the therapeutic process in turn.
And then we hope that they will also interact with me or the clinic coordinator or the other students in the staffing who are with them.
Yes.
And then there are more students here, more advanced students, but that notion of getting the social work students more integrated into the clinic with other therapists and with other admin staff, I think is really important for us. And COVID really made that difficult.
Yes.
So we're still working on kind of coming back in person and doing that more.
Yeah, and I think it's really valuable that here they can get in-person and Zoom therapy experience. They can have both, which I think is marketable by the time you're graduating. Because I think lots of places are going to hold both moving forward.
If there are social work students who are interested in seeking this out as a placement, how would you suggest what's the next step that they should take?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of options that social work students are welcome to email me if they have questions about the placement or if they have interest. We've had a couple of students who've had a split placement where they've been part-time here and part-time in another agency setting to get a different experience. And so if they have questions about that, they can absolutely email me. And then I think they could also contact Martina Ward or Brittany Adams, whoever their field liaison person is with the College of Social Work, because they can also answer questions or give them information about what it's looked like for other students to be here as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for offering your take and telling us a little bit about you. And like I said, we're really excited to have you on board and look forward to working with you and your students.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here.